All right. Oh, there it is. So whenever you're ready. It's unmuted, but it's very soft. Is there a way to? I think that the mic might be a bit far away. We can just barely hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
I wonder how many times "can you hear me now" has been said.
I think you own Verizon if you use that expression.
So thank you so much for inviting me. Your teacher Hoko-san was here with us, what, one Sunday or 2 Sundays ago? And it was a wonderful, wonderful talk. I hope that this talk will be entertaining at least, perhaps help you with some insights into maybe a little different take on Zen, art and Zen, A to Z. So I have sent several images to Fusatsu, who will pull them up and share a screen with them from time to time. But first I wanted to do a little introductory. And we have a flyer, some material on the book that I think Fusatsu can send to you, so that those of you who are interested in following up on the book will have the material in hand. This book that's been published, called The Original Frontier. It's based on kind of the American meme of the frontier, and how Buddha, some 2,500 years ago, entered the original frontier. You might say the original frontier of mind. It doesn't have geographic boundaries. It's here wherever we are in space-time. But like any frontier, entering into this Buddha mind, original mind, requires a leaving behind of the familiar and entering into uncharted territory. So that's kind of the meme, if you will, behind the book. But it's just meant to be a practical guide. It's a pretty lighthearted read, I think. It's not heavily philosophical, although I do get into some of the implications of our practice in the latter chapters. A second book, which is coming out, will be based on, this is like a personal manual that you can use, anybody can use really, newcomer or a long-time practitioner, in relation to their practice, kind of like a manual. And one whole section goes through deconstructing the senses, which is, I present how I think we confront the senses in Zazen. We don't confront them in the usual order: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. For most people, body comes first. People have resistance, pain in the knees, and so forth. And second, maybe mind, monkey mind. So by level of resistance or difficulty, I treat the senses in a different order, a different sequence as we confront them in meditation, or at least as I do. And unlike a lot of writings in Zen, other than Hakuin and maybe the Shurangama Sutra, it's pretty descriptive. And the reasons why people don't describe their experience in Zen, they're like spoiler alerts. You don't want to try to give things away that a person is better discovering on their own. But you also risk saying or describing something which is only pertinent to you and does not make that much sense for other people. There's a little bit in there on creativity and art. The second book will be more, where does Zen fit in the culture, taking the extremes of rationalism, secularism, science on one end, and the extremes of theism, religion, fundamentalism, and so forth on the other end, and putting Zen right down the middle in terms of the society. So that's a little broader thing. And the third book that's in the works is more about Zen and creativity. A paper was sent to you, the paper on Zen and creativity. So you may have had time to read a brief paper and an artist's statement about painting. So when I was a child, I'll launch now into the introduction to the Zen and art discussion for today. Unless somebody has a question. Does anybody have a question or comment they would like to make at this time? I'm looking over here because that's where the screen is. Looking at your happy, smiling faces. Okay, if not, let me just launch ahead. As a child, I grew up in a creative family. My dad was a jazz musician. He had a quintet in the 1940s, and he played keyboard and vibes, which is kind of a metal keyboard like a xylophone. My older brother was 4 years older than I, my only brother, and he was like a prodigy. The story is when he was born, the day he came home, my dad took him over and started putting his hands on the piano keyboard. By the time he was 4 years old, he was reading music and playing and so forth. So I was kind of scared off of music as my way of getting attention as a child. And I got into the Walt Disney movies and cartoons, and I taught myself to draw. So I think it was my way of getting attention as a very young child. And it kind of trained my eye to see. So then as I grew up and was 17 to leave home for university, I had a scholarship at U of I, Champaign-Urbana, where my brother had gone. But I also had somehow come into contact with the Institute of Design at the Illinois Tech in Chicago. And I thought I was going to go there, and they were giving me scholarships, offering me, to support me to come there. Our family didn't have enough money to put us through school. So I thought I was going to be a painter. I thought I was going to go there to learn to be an artist. And sure enough, they had, printmaking. I started out my master's thesis with a wonderful, famous graphic artist named Mish Cohn. And he also became my advisor. But over a period of time, it shifted from that to the design of a research and design for new consumer products that I had moved to Atlanta with in 1970. So my life shifted. What I thought was going to be a fine art education turned into graphic and industrial design. And so in the book, I relate kind of from that perspective. Design is a problem-solving sort of generalist tool. The good thing about it is you can redesign anything. You learn, you just learn a basic attitude and process. The bad thing is you can redesign anything. So you end up trying to design way too many things in your life. Like the furniture that you see in the Zendo here, one of my teachers, Ken Isaacs, taught us how to build with 2x2s that are common at a lumber yard. He would build space frames for New York apartments where you could sleep up on top and work underneath, that kind of thing. Very space conserving, but very sort of radical, not the kind of furniture most people think of as furniture. The Zendo is built on that system. It looks very Japanese, but it's actually very Western. So I think the particular confluences in my life that came together around design training, problem solving as a method, and even methodology, the study of method itself is a big part of design training. And the Bauhaus model, which as many of you may know, came out of Weimar, Germany at the beginning of the 1930s, when Hitler was on the ascendancy there. The Republic, they bailed out and came over to America. A guy named Moholy-Nagy, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy was Hungarian. He came to Chicago and set up the Institute of Design on the north side, which later merged with Illinois Tech on the south side by the time I got there. About that same time, 1939, Matsuoka Roshi came to the United States, and having different stints in Los Angeles and San Francisco. By the 50s, he moved, or the late 40s, we're tracing his biography now for the purposes of a video documentary we hope to put out the end of this year. He came to Chicago, but all of those kind of confluences were happening around the 40s when I was born. And by the time I got to school in the late 50s, that had all been sort of reestablished as Western design traditions. The Bauhaus was very influential, as most of you probably know. And the method in the Bauhaus was very much immersion. Immersion in the first year is called Foundation. As a freshman, you just went through all these different classes where you, instead of drawing, I was able to draw already, and they called that the compulsive image. They had to take that away from you to break you down to sort of rebuild on a more solid basis. This is typical of most training, like music and other kinds of dance, other kinds of training, where they'd have you take a big rag and sop it in black paint, and then you would, quote, draw on a piece of butcher's paper, very large. And the mark you would make would be your own signature. For instance, they would give you these kinds of assignments. So by the time you got done doing those kinds of exercises, your own signature was no longer your signature. In other words, it was something familiar, and then it became something very strange because of the way they had you use it. So that's one definition of creativity, is making the familiar strange. When you watch the Super Bowl every year, people like to watch the ads. It's the same old beer, the same old cars, but everybody tunes in to see what the creatives did with it this year. They want to see what other angle or take did you do on selling me some Budweiser, selling me another car, And that's where the creativity comes out. It's the difference in what you do with the same old material. So people in creative backgrounds don't imagine that we're actually creating anything. All we're really doing is rearranging. So it goes to some Zen principles like the 4 elements, return to their nature, and just taking the elements of gravity, of earth, wind, fire, water. If you look at my paintings, they're done with sume ink, watercolor. I figured out a secret sauce for being able to paint on the glass and have the pigment actually stick to the glass. Some of you who are housewives probably know what it is, but I'm not going to tell you. So they're 3-dimensional, and that's also making the familiar strange. It's the familiar painting, but it has layers, and some of them I did 3 or 4 layers, and some were see-through where you'd have multiple layers. You could look at it from either side. It was an open frame. So it's taking very familiar components, elements such as paint, water, how you address the canvas, how you put it on the canvas, how you work it, I remember Red Pine, Bill Porter saying when he does translation from Chinese, he dances with the translation. He dances with the words, he dances with them. It's a little bit like that. When you're working with pigment, fluid, wet, horizontal, partly horizontal, it's running. Everybody knows water seeks its own level. So the degree of so-called control that you have all of a sudden is like God working with a microcosmos that's moving very rapidly and will get out of control very easily. So it's dancing with the elements, dancing with the pigment, dancing with the liquid, trying to not control it, but trying to allow it to do what it's going to do, but not have it run off of the canvas. I had friends in college who made fun of me at that time. In the painting class, I would do miniatures because I couldn't afford to buy large canvases and a lot of expensive paint materials. So my teacher allowed me to do miniatures. And he, by the way, was the one who brought me to the University of Illinois at Chicago Circle campus later to teach there. And then I taught at the School of the Art Institute. So I had a kind of an academic career around art as well. And my friends would make fun of me because my studio was so pristine and clean. But I made the point to them that they don't pay you for the pigment on the floor and the walls. They only pay you for the pigment on the canvas, So there's a lot of backstories here, but just to cut to the chase, if we could pull up the black and white image if you can find that one. I'm going to rely very much on Fusatsu here to help with this because I don't know how to do this, to share screen and show you if you can find the early black and white one. I started out, when I was about 70. This is just a picture of myself with a painting there. And that one, that was not quite black and white, but you can see it's not painted on the glass. And it's mounted as what is called a float, where it's floating off the background. Going to be having trouble finding them. But I started out using sumi ink, which traditionally is used as landscape painting, shoto, calligraphy, and so forth. And they have a second color that's typical of ancient Chinese and Japanese painting, which is called Vermilion. It's a very beautiful orange, something similar to the person who's wearing the orange t-shirt there, the orange shirt. Very bright, but it's also, it can be diluted and used very thin. And those of you who are somewhat familiar with shoto or brush painting from the tradition have seen that color. So I started off using just black. If we can go to, okay, let's just go through them in order, and then I'll change the narrative. If you go back to the second one, there we go. So my gallerist will show up here. His name is Yukai Lin. They're from Taiwan, he and his family. And he's first generation American, I think. But his parents actually came over from Taiwan. So when I was about 70, as I started to say, Andrew Dietz is one of our members, and he's well connected in the arts community. He wrote a wonderful book called The Last Folk Hero, which was about these Black artists that were discovered in the South here in the 90s, leading up to the Olympics in 96. They had a big exhibit over in what we know of as the old police building here in Atlantis, near where I live, pretty near here, of these folk artists who had this wonderful sculpture, yards and houses and sheds full of all this beautiful, wonderful art that nobody had discovered. And there were the usual rumors and concerns that the white agent was making all the money and the money wasn't going to the artist, that kind of thing. So Andrew had written a kind of tell-all book about that called The Last Folk Art Hero. The Last Folk Hero, I think it was called. Wonderful book. So Andrew became a member. He's now on our board of directors. He's a long-time member here, and he's become a disciple, and I believe he's sewing his black robe, so he's serious about this tradition. So one day I said to him, you know, there's no money in Zen, as Okamura Roshi could testify. So I had to pursue other outside endeavors. I relinquished my professional career of pursuing national design accounts, mostly in the retail industry, around 2003. The last big major account I had, I gave up around 2003, when all of my senior students were saying they wanted me to be full-time. And so I started segueing over into full-time Zen and looking to make income from Zen. And fortunately, we've been able to grow enough that there is a significant income stream from our Zen activities, but it's not quite enough. And so talking to Andrew one day, Keisei is his Dharma name. It means, I think, sound of mountain, rivers, and streams. One of Dogen's tracks. I'm probably not quoting the title quite correctly. But Keisei and I were talking. I said, well, do you think I could sell my art? And he said, well, if you could tell the story, you know. And as it happened, he had a connection with Yukai Lin. Yukai is also well known in Emory, which one of our denizens in the background here, raise your hand there, is also from Emory and is a good friend of Yukai. But Andrew knew him, and so he talked to him and said, can Sensei and I come and show you his art? He was in Buckhead at that time, the gallery. He's now closer, he's on 10th Street here. This was like 12 years ago. And so we haul all this art up there and show it to him and talk to him, and he's interested. And he's just put a show together where he had one whole hall about as big as this room, which is about 30 by 30, the Zendo here, which we do use as a gallery from time to time. But he had one whole room where the artist had had some sort of problem and he wasn't going to be able to show. So as serendipity would have it, there was an opportunity. And so he had said, why don't you do a show at the Zen Center? Invite the arts community and I'll come. And we had done that. And he came here and he picked 24 different pieces to go in that show. And so that's how it started. And at that time I was doing black and white. Now, if you back up once, I just want to say something about from Yukai, I treat everyone I work with as a collaborator in the most positive sense of the word. We're not in the World War II sense, not in the Vichy sense. A collaborator in the best sense of the word, that my gallerist brings a lot to the table that I don't understand about art. In other words, what sells, how you frame it, how you mount it, how you do this and that. So this one that we're looking at is a poster of one show, Alchemy, a solo exhibition featuring Elliston Roshi. And if you receive the video of my work, it was of this show. So the video goes in, zooms in and scans and goes across these images so you can see the three-dimensionality of them and how they create animation as you walk past them, because this one is called Aurora, and sort of the Aurora Borealis look up in the top part is on the glass. The bottom part is on the back panel. And so, I believe the little blossom at the bottom is also on the glass. I can't recall for sure, but as you walk by, they shift against each other. So you can say a solo exhibition featuring Elliston Roshi. And that goes back to, I think it says 2019, 2015. I can't read it from here. Anyway, I learned that there are all of these sort of technical things that you have to do in the professional world of exhibiting. I had been with a gallery for over a year, but she had never put my work in a show. So I went in and took it out. It didn't make any sense for me to have art in the gallery. It's just sitting in the back room. So when you try to do something like this, all of you are probably professionals. You come from some profession, and you understand the kind of conflictual things that can arise about compromising your ethics or your aesthetic or and so forth in order to be successful. We had conflicts like that at the University of Illinois, and the student body there, it was the Vietnam War at that time. And it was the police riots at the '68 convention in Chicago. And so we had a huge division in the student body between the extremely liberal students and extremely conservative students at the University of Illinois and at the Art Institute as well. But it came out at the University of Illinois much more. There were more demonstrations, there was et cetera, et cetera. One of the teachers there, Jerry Jacquard, was a Frenchman, and he did large outdoor sculptures, very beautiful, with a big wheel, and all different kinds of shapes, extremely creative. And US Steel started giving him Core 10 to use in his sculptures. Core 10 is a kind of steel that rusts, but then it stops. Like aluminum will corrode, but then it stops. How are we doing on time? Okay. So, and then the architects would not specify it for buildings because it's rusty, And so they were giving this Core 10 and probably other support to Jerry in order that he would make these beautiful sculptures of this rusty metal, and they would be sitting out in public, outdoor. And so it started gaining an aesthetic appreciation. And then architects started specifying it for buildings. The Omni here was originally built of Core 10, if I recall correctly. So the students got up in arms over that. They said, wait a minute, US Steel, So Jerry began teaching this 8 dimensions of creativity. It's a little bit like John Dido Laurie's 8 dimensions of creativity, where one of those dimensions, the first one is zero. Zero dimension is concept. First dimension is words. Second dimension is drawings. The third dimension, and so forth. One of the dimensions is economics. He said, if you don't solve that dimension, guess what? No art. He said a tree has economics. It's water, it's nutrients from the soil, it's sunshine. If a seed falls into a spot where that's not going to happen, guess what? No tree. So anyway, these kinds of ethical or aesthetic arguments abound in the industrial world, and that's also true of art. So this is an example of a poster on this piece, and I wanted to show you several examples of one piece so you can kind of see the iterations and where they fit into the process. So let's go to the next one, and this shows it floating in a wall display of other paintings which have all since sold. And this Aurora also sold in this show. Just to the right there, you see one called Ocean Gate. This one just sold yesterday. That's how long that one's been sitting on the shelves. Ocean Gate is named after this idea in Buddhism that you hear about, that under the ocean, there's this sort of magical gate through which the fishes swim. And when the fishes swim through it, they turn into dragons, and then they can fly. So this was kind of homage to Ocean Gate. You can't see the three-dimensionality of it, but the black rectangle in the middle is the same proportion as the frame itself. In art, it's called referring back to the plane. You know, abstract art in the 50s, 60s, 70s started doing that here with the famous, you know, Pollock and de Kooning and all those guys in New York. It was more like, you know, bringing people back to the physical reality of this thing as a real object. So that's one of the threads running through my art. All I'm trying to do is let the pigment, the water, the gravity, the drying, you know, all the elemental forces illustrate what they can do if you give them free rein, if you let them go. And many people in music and dance and other performing arts and plastic arts will say the same thing. I'm just trying to get out of the way. So that's not an original idea by any means. But if you go on to the next one, here's a case where I repainted this one probably 5 times. We showed it, it didn't sell. We showed it, it didn't sell. So I'd take it apart and I'd rework it. And eventually this sold. And this was another way of getting scale. The other paintings you saw there, Aurora is like 4 by 6 feet, which is very large for watercolor. This is another way of getting scale. You can do these diptychs, or you can do arrays of smaller images. If you go on to the next one, this one's called Firebird. This is the original, one of the early ones I was talking about. This is called Flight. It sold the very first time it was shown. It's on 2 very large pieces of watercolor paper, in which I did a pouring stroke with the sumie pigment. And this is not a very good shot of it. It's a little flat. You can kind of see yellowish, bluish, greenish colors on the left side there, and sort of reddish, purplish colors in the light gray area. Those colors are actually, they actually show. They're kind of like a peacock feather, iridescent. And that's one of the things they say about sumie ink. Originally, it's made of soot. The black pigment comes from soot, like from a candle. And when it dries, it becomes iridescent that way. So the way the light hits it, you start to see yellow, blue, red, green. You see 4 colors in the black. So again, this was an array. This is a diptych. These 2 pieces of paper are actually framed in the same frame. But that's another way you can work small and get scale. And Yukai would often say, these are too big, you know, but for some reason, the big ones always sold in the shows. I don't know why. And then we had to go hang them and install them. That's a real, this one we had to hang on a staircase. So I'm up on this ladder thinking this is not the smartest thing I've ever done, you know, taking my life in my hands to hang this painting above a stairwell in a condo. So we can go on to the next one, Susats. So here, these 3, the images of the folks online are blocking the far one on the right. I don't know if that's important, but the one on the right is called Parting. You can see where it looks like the Red Sea kind of parting at the top. That's where I derive the name. I typically use a natural name or a musical name, like fugue or sonata, something like that. I think of my art as music for the eyes. And this was Kandinsky, another artist from the original Bauhaus. There was Paul Klee, Walter Gropius, the architect, a lot of very famous people. And Kandinsky, one of the gallerists told me, was actually a synesthete. Kandinsky would hear sounds when he saw color. And if he looked at a different color, he heard different sound. When he heard sounds, he would see color. So he was actually a synesthete. And he called his painting music for the eyes. It's a very, very hard line. If you look at Kandinsky's work, you can see. And he also came up with principles like you should have 3 major points in the composition. So it's a very musical kind of idea, like adagio, piano, or, however you want to think of that. So here's the aurora floating in the middle here. It's actually about the same size as the one on the right, which I call Parting. The one on the right has no glass. It doesn't have even a closing glass. I didn't paint on the glass. It's open. It was painted on kind of a panel, kind of like a gesso panel, if you know what that is. It's a painted panel. And this was the very first one where, if you look at the size of it, roughly 4 by 6 feet, the amount of pigment on there probably would fill a thimble or maybe 2 thimbles. I work wet. I was working wet, and I discovered with this painting that I could actually work this way and work very large scale. I don't know if we can zoom in on that, but if you have it on your own computer at home, just zoom in on it and look at some of the detail. It's just amazing. So I would call you, Kai, once in a while. I'd say, I think I've got a minor masterpiece here. But I'm not bragging on myself. It's because of whatever it did this marvelous thing that I could say, this is a masterpiece. I was painting out on the patio one day, and I lived right next door. Right next door is this sort of like a mansion compared to our house. And Rabbi Eliyahu Schusterman, he's an ultra-Orthodox rabbi. At a large family, they have 8 kids of their own kids, and all the kids come over from the synagogue on Saturdays and run around the yard. So I'm out there painting one day on the back patio, and he's barbecuing. He's on the stairwell. And he said, "What are you doing, painting?" I said, "Yeah, I'm painting." Yep. And so I brought a piece over and talked to him about how I work. And he said, "Oh, you let God paint for you." I said, "Well, you could say that. You're a rabbi. You can say that. I wouldn't say that." But so it's kind of like, as I said, getting out of the way. The one on the left is my most recent piece. It's called Golden Dragon, after Elon Musk's SpaceX, their rocket that they launched. They called it Golden Dragon, the one that carried the people to the space station for the first time, I think, a successful launch for a private company. And I was hoping Elon would buy it because that might lead to a lot of things, but somebody else just bought it last week. And it's not as big as the others. This distorts it a little bit. It's about 40 by 60, which Yukai calls an over the sofa size. And actually where we hung it, you can go on to the next one. I'm not sure how many more of these we have. Okay, so these are 2 in which you can see I was not adding the extra rectangular plane. In all the others, they're always the same proportion as the canvas itself or as the frame itself. These were not adding that additional space into the frame at that time. These are a little bit earlier. They both sold quickly. The one on the left, they're both about 4 by 6 feet. The one on the left, the part that is really dark, the vertical column, that's on the glass. And the rest of it is on the background. And this was marvelous to me because this was the first time that those 2 had come together. Both of these sort of represented, they came together so well that they look like they were painted on the same surface. And if you can imagine my process, I'm working both on the back panel and I'm working on the glass, sometimes both on the same table. I have a large table in my studio. But sometimes there's not enough room. I just do one panel, and when it's dry, and it takes a long time to dry, I literally spend a lot of my time watching the paint dry, literally. But once I get the two of them done, it's when I first sandwich them together and look at them, that's the first time I see it. I can imagine it, but I can't see it until I actually sandwich them, and I can see how they go together. So for instance, on the left, I could flip that one over, and then the dark column would be on the right side, but it would block a lot of the detail of that beautiful part of the background there. So I find the best position for the front relative to the back. If I paint a square like the Firebird that you saw earlier, I have 4 choices. I can rotate it 90 degrees 4 different times. So the one on the left here is called, the one on the right is called Rite of Spring. And the one on the left, what the heck did I call that one? Rite of Spring, after Stravinsky, obviously. And then on the left, I'll think of it. Let's go to the next one. I try not to name them something that will restrict the viewer's imagination. So go back one. So you can see in the background there, Rite of Spring, it's got a little darker impression. That's installed. That's where it's hanging in somebody's home. And here you have a little better close up. You can see some of the detail in that. It looks kind of like a pool or kind of like an ocean. And some of the tendrils that are going up between the parting look exactly like plants growing. It's kind of like monkeys and typewriters. You know, if you let them go long enough, they'll write Shakespeare. In this case, if you do this long enough, it will replicate every possible dendritic natural form in nature. You know, brain tissue. I started this in lithography. As I said, I started doing my master's lithography. We have a lithograph hanging in the Zendo conference room here, the Zen Center conference room, which I did in college. And it's when I got back to this in my 70s that I started carrying this forward into larger scale, same kind of media. But you can see I was along the same lines, and some of the detail down in the corners. I talked to Mish Cohen. I said, somebody's a lot better artist than I am. You know, whoever's doing this detail here down in the corner that I didn't even try to cause. And so I started backing away and trying to just set up the parameters around which that could happen and get more and more out of the way, where I was less and less shaping the actual image and allowing it to be shaped by the natural process. So if we can go to the next one. This begins to show some of these in scale. You can see on the left, there's the Firebird, and that's Yukai on the right there with somebody's son. When we were in person, he has an opening and he would do one-man shows or three-man shows. And now, since the COVID hit, the gallery just has 1 or 2 of my pieces up, 1 or 2 of everybody's pieces. And if it sells, then he puts another one up, but he's not changing shows. But in these days, when we'd have a show, he would have an opening party on a Friday night, and hundreds of people would come, hundreds of people. So it was a big festive event, music, food, drink. It was, he's a pianist. He teaches classical piano. And I kept saying, Yukai, you've got to get a grand piano in here and play for these openings. Somebody finally gave him a baby grand piano. So it's now sitting in the Zendo, and he plays. When I go in there, I play the piano. Okay, let's look at the next one.
That was the last slide.
Oh, that's the last slide.
Yeah.
Okay.
Try the video.
Yeah, if you could see if you can just run the video for everybody, that would be great. And it has a musical soundtrack, not my music. If you go to my podcast, my voiceover, John Mitchell is on tonight, and he's our producer. He's trained me how to do the voiceover, trained me how to write them correctly. The podcast is called Unmind. And then he selects a piece of my music, an instrumental, which is really a setting for a piece from the Soto Zen liturgy. I call the whole collection Sutra Suite. But we don't put the vocals on the podcast for obvious reasons. So the background music you hear will, if you look at and listen to the podcast, is my original music. It's pretty creative. I'm not that great an instrumentalist or composer, so I call them composers' rough cuts. But John somehow, his Dharma name is Kyosaku, after the stick. So that tells you what kind of personality he has. He somehow finds a connection with the music and the voiceover that just works every time. Let's see if this works. So that worked very well. That was like seeing a lot of old friends to me.
T-minus 1 minute, so Q&A.
Okay. Q&A, T-minus 1 minute. So as Picasso said, it's all there, but I'm not Picasso, so I have to talk about the art a lot. I did want to say one thing before we do Q&A, and I'm willing to stay here as long as any of you are. The art is not in the piece, and the art is not in the artist. I don't see the same thing you see when you look at it. So the art is not in you either. So it's like Sokayan's question. He said, the dog, the chicken, and the person see the fire hydrant, but only the person sees the red. Where is the red? The Zen question. So I say, where is the art? It's certainly not, it's not my exclusive domain. Whoever purchases the art has to see something in it. But I think because of the natural processes, like for a long time, we had this beautiful stain in our shower. It looked like Gandhi in a sun hat looking down at you, you know, a mold stain. So I think one positive response to this art would be to look at the things we consider ugly and see them as being beautiful. So Fusatsu is going to take over Q&A now. She facilitates the process and she will ask you whatever she's going, however she's going to do it.
Yep. And Doju, if you would like to, since this is your meeting, your Sangha, I just wanted to give you that opportunity, but we usually just open it up to the floor to let people have questions. So however you would like to proceed, sir.
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead.
Awesome. Again, welcome everyone. We're so grateful to have everyone today's talk. So if you have a question for Sensei, please just come off of mute, raise your hand. We welcome this time to be able to interact and have conversation.
We may have
Gotcha.
Facebook as well.
Yeah, we don't today.
Okay, no Facebook. Stunned into silence.
Say again.
Yeah, I think you mentioned in passing about calligraphy. I was wondering if you've devoted any, significant work to that.
I've never been trained, but I recently completed 16 bamboo paintings as gifts for people who conducted our annual Silent Thunder Order conference last year, and they were sent to them. And some of them, one of them framed, so I framed them. I do my own framing. Even on these large pieces, I frame them myself because they have to be engineered to be very strong because they're so large. And I've taken to doing, I did a whole series of moonlight bamboo, which are bamboo painted in white on a black rice paper that's been soaked with sumi ink, so it's spritzed and so it's black. So the bamboo, and people like those, I think, better than the daylight bamboo. I also do ensos, did a series of ensos, and those were as thank yous for people. They're available for sale. We put them out periodically as an email announcement and say, here's what's left of this edition. So the moonlight bamboo has 4 left out of an edition of 8. 4 have been purchased, and they're in the size range of 20 by 30, roughly, a little smaller than that. And I can frame them for you if you want them framed. Otherwise, we just send them in a mailing tube, send them to you. And I'm moving forward on a couple of other series of more traditional approaches like that. One is an enso, which you're familiar with the enso, right? The circular. Mm-hmm. And I paint a Bodhidharma face in it, so that the enso is like his robe and his beard, and then his face is there. And another one is a dragon, where the enso, the start of the enso becomes the dragon's face. So I paint the teeth and things with white, and I paint legs on as it goes around, kind of like the Native American symbols of a lizard, or if you've ever seen those, but rougher, not that hard line. And so, several things along those lines. And I always inscribe them with a saying from Dogen, like the moonlight bamboo. There were a couple of things, Hakuin, how bright and transparent the moonlight of wisdom, is one of the inscriptions. And then I sign it and stamp it. So people like them. It makes a nice gift if you want to gift it to somebody. So if you're interested in that, you should have my email. If you don't, I don't know how to give it to you, but send me an
make sure.
email and I'll follow up with, I'll show you some of that more traditional work if you're interested in that.
And Doju, what I'll do is I'll send the information over. And again, I know some people had some challenges with the video, so we'll send the link so you can see that as well. Apologies for that. We're living in a virtual world, so I'll make sure everybody has the information for that.
It's really two different worlds, though. You're doing the big, quote, fine art for that, for the gallery is a very different thing from doing the others. So I don't find any real contradiction for me personally there, doing both.
I just wanted to mention, I also studied at the University of Illinois
Oh, good. Yeah, my
in
brother,
the 90s.
in the 90s. My brother taught jazz there and traveled with the U of I jazz band all over the world.
Well, thank you very much for your talk.
A little different, maybe, I hope.
Sensei, quick question. Can you speak a little bit for how your practice informs your work or vice versa, since practice kind of becomes one? So can you speak a little bit about that?
All works of art, all practices of art, plastic or performing, I think are considered meditation. You know, most people who do any of that consider it a kind of meditation. And in the case of ballet, you know, it's a very fast, or modern dance is a very fast moving meditation. You know, we all know Kaz Tanahashi does the beautiful big ensos. One of our students is practicing with him and learning calligraphy. We had a Shoto teacher here for some time, a Japanese woman who is very, very good. Her brother is a famous Shoto painter, calligrapher. I've never trained in the classical copying the Heart Sutra and that kind of thing. But in the Bauhaus tradition, you weren't allowed to use a brush until you had gone through certain levels of training and just making marks. When you finally got to where you could use a brush, then all of the exercises were to show you what a brush can do. And so we had the Chinese, Japanese style brushes that we use, but what we did with them was very different. It was very scientific sort of disciplines, so that you learn very similar. I have a book on Shoto painting, you know, how to paint bamboo and stuff in the traditional classical way. Very similar to that. It's showing Kailan art for some reason. Very similar to that type of technical approach. We were trained in that in later years in the Bauhaus training model. So it's a meditation, and I understand that a lot of Eastern artists will meditate before they paint. And so they'll kind of settle down, you know, and then they'll pick up the brush and start. I had the good fortune of going to see Fukushima Roshi when he came here. I can't remember how long ago it was, had to be the early 2000s. And he gave a demonstration at Oglethorpe University. One of my students, senior students, wanted to go. He was chairman of the board at the time. And so I said, sure, let's go. And I went with him. He showed us meditation. He had us sit there and count our breaths for 20 minutes and all. Then he did a demonstration where he did ensos. And I've had several students say, how do you make these ensos so perfect? You know, I told him at one time I was actually putting them on a turntable and I would just touch the brush to the paper. Perfect circle. You know? But I stopped doing that. That's the kind of thing you do in design school as experiments. But watching Fukushima Roshi, everybody was saying, and somebody who's on tonight was telling me the same thing. They were trying to, and they couldn't do it. It looks like they're done very fast, right? It looks like the turning of the universe is what it's supposed to symbolize, or turning of eternity. But it's done very slowly. So he'd take this big brush and he'd hold it down near the bristles, dip it in the paint. He had a big sheet of paper with stones holding it to the floor. He's a little guy, he's sitting there cross-legged, and he'd lean forward and clomp, it would go on the paper, and then he'd go, around like this, pull it off. And it was just beautiful. It just looked like it went. When you want it to look fast, you go slow, I guess. So those kind of techniques and understandings are something that are natural in design training. You don't necessarily have to have a traditional teacher. And the bamboos I started painting, I think one of the rules in painting bamboo is you never go back over the bamboo again. It's the first stroke, right? That's part of it. I didn't like them. And so I would go back over them. I know I'm breaking a rule, right? But what it did was it's called scumbling in painting, where you kind of scumble and the paint kind of scumbles over the surface and leaves a texture. It scumbled them, and I grow bamboo in my backyard, black bamboo in my backyard, so I know what bamboo looks like. And it laid these beautiful layers where in combination, they began to look like real bamboo. So I was breaking a rule, but it was making them better. And then the ones that I didn't like the composition on, the black bamboos, the moonlight bamboos, I call them, I didn't want to throw all that paper away. It's like $6 a sheet. It's wonderful, heavy rice paper. You don't want to. So you practice on butcher's paper or something. And some of the old practice sheets from the Far East are just precious treasures today. I mean, the ancient masters, they're practice sheets, There's only one artist I know of where that's true, and that was Franz Klein. If you know him, he did the big black and white paintings in the modern abstract movement. Somebody bought his cleaning rag and paid tens of thousands of dollars for it, had it stretched because it looked like that. So the moonlight bamboos, I laid out on my table, which is covered with plastic, so it's not absorbent. And I spritzed them with a regular spritzer. I put the Sumi ink, mixed it in the spritzer. I spritzed them until they were soaked black, then let them dry. Then you have to steam iron the sheet flat. So there's all these techniques that you develop. And then I went it over and painted in white because I didn't like the original compositions. And so that way I saved the paper. I didn't have to throw the paper away. So when you learn a sort of free-flowing design attitude, you're not so picky about the traditional ways of doing things. You find workarounds, and that's considered legit. We have what we call happy accidents. We leave them in because they're good, but we didn't do that.
Thanks, Sensei.
Okay, I'm looking at the wrong place. Here's the camera.
Yeah.
It's hard not to look at all your faces. I was on a call with South Korea at 7 o'clock this morning. It's a world peace movement that I joined. Teshi and Jim Smith was on it too. And there's 6 images at the top. I flipped through them and I counted 90. So they had 90 times 6 people in the audience, maybe 540 people.
Fusatsu, I think that Hennesis has a question.
Sure.
Hi, I actually have 2 questions. The first one's kind of simple. You said that Mahali Naj was a big inspiration in a lot of the architecture at the temple. Is that correct?
Mahali Naj was one of the Bauhaus faculty who bailed out from Weimar in the 30s and came to America. He happened to land in Chicago and he set up his own school on the north side. It was in a big factory warehouse, open floors where they hung strings between the classes to divide the classes. And later that was moved and merged with the Institute of Design. So now their logo is capital ID plus IIT. That's the logo of the design school. That's where I trained. I did my undergraduate and graduate work there. And then I taught at the University of Illinois in the School of the Art Institute. But Mahali Naj was a designer. In those days, design was trying to humanize the outputs of the Industrial Revolution, which would be working machines, but they'd sometimes have sharp edges you'd cut your finger on if you used them. And so the idea was somebody had to step in and do the ergonomic design of all of this stuff that was coming out of the factories. That was the original sort of impetus for establishing the Bauhaus, was to train people to do the secondary level operations on what were basically crude but necessary inventions, new products, new technologies coming online from the Industrial Revolution. Sometimes it later veered into some things like built-in obsolescence and some kind of ethically questionable ideas, you know.
Yeah, I was kind of curious if there were places that I could see some of the like layout of the temple, since you mentioned some of the information about those influences.
The temple, by the temple, are you talking about Bauhaus? Or are you talking about?
Oh, where you are.
Here.
Yeah, you mentioned some influence there. Unless I'm
Oh,
misremembering.
well, if you go on the website www.ASZC for Atlanta Soto Zen Center, you'll see some pictures of the interior. I think we have a drop. Facebook page should have some pictures.
Yep. And I don't want to make you dizzy, but at the end, if you want, I can zoom the camera around for you so you can see the inside of the Zendo. If you want to stick around for that, I can do that for you as well.
I'd appreciate that. My other question is, at one point you mentioned sort of trying to leave a lot of your works up to interpretation of the viewer. And something that I've experienced trying to make art myself, and granted it's more in the realm of writing, because kind of like you, I had a overshadowing of someone else in my life who was really good at a particular craft, my father, who was really good at painting, so I tried to get into writing. But something that I've often had difficulty with is writers who often try to make it so that everything is concrete and easy for someone to understand oftentimes leave so little to the viewer's imagination that they just don't care and they get bored. On the other hand, I have this part that's very insecure, that if people don't interpret my art the way I want to, I can get often frustrated. And especially like there are some people who, like I'm thinking about Friedrich Nietzsche, who was both a philosopher and an artist, and often his last work he didn't even publish until after he died because he was worried it could be misused and misunderstood, and it was. So there's this kind of balancing of like, trying to, on one hand, like make sure that the kind of general principle is understood, but at the same time leaving it open to the viewer. And that's something that I'm kind of wondering if you could talk a bit more about, because it's something that interests me.
I think I have a couple of things on that might help. It's a big question, and it goes to what I said is, where does the art really reside? It's not really in the painting. It's not in my view or impression of my own painting, because the person buying it, the collectors, they don't see it the same way. And I don't see it the way they see it. They don't see it the way I see it, et cetera. So where is it? It's floating in there somewhere, like the red in the fire hydrant. It has to do with the tricolor vision that we happen to have. Some birds have, most birds don't. Most birds can't see red. Dog can't see color, et cetera, chicken. So where is it? Sokayan explained that it's, I'm not going to go too far into this, but he explained that it's there are two kinds of dharmas. A dharma means law, teaching, and so forth, but also means thing, object. Like a particle, electron is a dharma, is a dharma being. It has a meaning of being. So he was saying that the fire hydrant is a real and existent dharma, in the sense of a thing, a being. You kick it and it'll bruise your toe. It can be found. The red is a real but non-existent dharma. And if you go into the Tibetan theory of mind and perception and so forth, they go into this quite a great deal with different terminology, where if I talk to you on the phone, I said, I just did a painting in red, you know what I mean. You have your own version of red. But in Zen, we have to admit, along with brain science, that nobody sees the same red. It's not possible. We're very similar to each other, but the biology of our eye is going to be different enough that, and colorblind people have handicap in that sense, or the version of this that tells us this is true. They don't see color the way we see it. So none of us, we could extrapolate from that and say none of us actually see the same red ever. It's not possible. So it's a Zen idea, kind of like I never see you because I only see you the way you were a minute ago, a micro moment ago, because it takes time for the light to reach my eyes bouncing off of you, right? I mean, in Zen, we're used to these kinds of dilemmas. So in art, you could say, as we say in Zen, the teacher can only do so much. If the student is not willing to put in the work, it's like an athlete. If they're not willing to do the work, no amount of coaching is going to help. And so in our teaching relationships, and this applies to all relationships, children, parents, spouses, and so forth, you can only be something like 50% responsible for them. So in art, you have to kind of let that go and say, I'm doing my best. If they don't get it, sorry, but it's mostly up to them. If they don't see it, then I can talk to them about it and try to help. But I think you have to give that up so that it doesn't become an inhibition in your practice of art. Otherwise, you're kind of caught in the middle between you and them, right? You can't be them. Same thing in Dharma teaching. You have to, understand, as Buddha did. Buddha, in his last sermon, the Lotus Sutra, which I happen to be reading right now, it's subject of my next podcast. He was told all these pundits had come to debate. He said they're free to go. He recognized that he wasn't going to reach everybody. So communication, as we say in design, is the message received, not the message sent. If you're good at communications design, you figure that out and you understand your audience, meet them where they're at, and so you get more and more clear in your communication. But you can't really take responsibility for whether they get your art the way you do. That's probably impossible.
Awesome. And again, just got time check from Doju that we're getting ready to close things down.
Sure.
Any last comments, Sensei?
Yeah, anybody wants to follow up with me, we will provide my email. My email is my short-term memory. And if you send me an email, we can set up an appointment for a dialogue or however you want to follow up in person. I'm open to that. And that's basically how I've been practicing my position as guiding teacher. I have maybe 30 Dokusan calls a week and a half a dozen groups a month, 30 calls a week. But there's plenty of time in there.
And Doju, I'm gonna go ahead and let me just check the chat one more time. Yeah, and Doju did record this, so we'll be able to provide that link. But I'm gonna hand it back over to you, Doju, for any comments and last items. Thanks everyone for allowing us to join you this morning. It's always great to hang out with our sisters, Sangha, Dharma, and brothers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fusatsu, for facilitating, and thank you, Elliston Roshi, for your talk. We wrap up usually with the 4 Bodhisattva Vows. So we'll go ahead and chant those together when you're ready. And then after that, if you'd like to offer 3 more prostrations, and then we'll be done. So thank you very much. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Elliston Roshi. Just a few announcements from here at Sanshin. There isn't much happening right away. We do have Ryaku Fusatsu on Monday in the evening, so you can check the website for that. And also we have our April at-home retreat begins April 1st, which is a Thursday. So if you're interested in participating in that, you can register for it on the website. Other than that, I don't think that we have anything to announce. So thank you again, Elliston Roshi, and see you all later on. Have a good rest of your Sunday. Take care.
Doju, we wanted to say thank you. Your website is beautiful. Just wanted to say congratulations on that.
Oh, thank you. That was all Hoko's work.
That's everyone. Have a great week.
Take care, you too.